Today, we begin our study of the book of Exodus. Exodus is by far the greatest escape story ever. 2 to 3 million slaves escaped from the greatest, most fortified kingdom in the world. You know, when you think of escapes, you think of a few hundred people, sometimes from a jail. What is 2 to 3 million people in your mind? If they were to line up 5 in a row, like an army marching, they would stretch over 100 miles. Now that's something like halfway between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. Or if you're Filipino, it's like Manila to Baguio, all right? Now, of course, people don't walk so disciplined 5 in a row. They had cattle, they had children, so they'll probably be less close together, and they'll probably stretch 200-mile long column. Now, of course, they were also walking through one of the most hostile terrains in the world. There was no source of food, no water. How do you feed 2 to 3 million people? You need about 1,000 tons of food a day. God airdropped 1,000 tons of manna every day for them. 2 to 3 million people will need like 2 million gallons of water just to survive. I'm not talking take a nice bath, wash our hands all the time. 2 million gallons of water. God provided for them. Just by way of looking at this, right? It's for 40 years, this journey. China's Mao Zedong's long march was 1 year. This is 40 years. Mao Zedong's long march was maybe 50,000 men. This one, 2 to 3 million. The long march was through villages where there was some people could provide some food. This was through totally hostile territory. So I hope you're getting the picture now. How is this so? In the Egyptian army, when it was in 1973, there was the Arab-Israeli war, and the Egyptian army was stalled, halted in this same desert for 3 days. Couldn't get enough food provided the logistics. They surrendered because there was no food. A few thousand men, 3 days, not 40 years. The Bible also says their shoes never wore out. Wow. If you have a car today and you drove in the same desert, you better have lots of spare tires, because this desert is full of sharp rocks, cuts even the best quality tires. Now you must remember the Jews, this is 3,500 years ago, 3,500 years ago. What kind of shoes did they wear, or sandals? Very rich people, leather. Leather doesn't last that long, but these are not rich people, these are slaves. Their sandals were made of straw, probably. Straw for 40 years in this desert. Now that's another amazing miracle. Now, who wrote this book? Okay, this book is written by Moses. It's a very simple book to read because it has just basically 2 parts. The first half, more or less, is a narration or report of events, of what God did to deliver these people. The second half of the book is not so much a report of events, but a record of laws that God gives. So the first part is about God's grace to men. The second part is about man's responsibility to God's grace, man's gratitude. Okay? So this is a very simple book, just two halves. Now, Moses was the perfect man to write this. He was educated as Pharaoh's adopted grandson. Okay? Pharaoh's daughters adopted him. Now, finest education. All the other slaves couldn't read or write. They were slaves. Okay? He was the only one. Not only could read and write, but because he was trained properly, he had an organized mind to accurately report what he saw. He was like an eyewitness account of all these books, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, the last 4 books of the Torah, or the Pentateuch. The first book, he wasn't born yet, so obviously he didn't do an eyewitness reporting. The first book, God had to tell him how creation was made, how the world was created, because he wasn't there, nobody was there. The rest he had to collect oral history. But in this, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, he's an eyewitness account reporting. Now Moses is an awesome person. To the Jews, he's the second most revered after Abraham. To us, wow, he's a man who's literally saw God face to face. Talked to God, God talked to him more than possibly anyone else. He's a man who did more miracles than any other human. And his miracles were like, whoa, awesome miracles. So this is a little introduction to the book of Exodus. Let us now look at the book of Exodus from a spiritual overview. The book of Exodus is central to the Old Testament, as the cross is central to the New Testament. In the book of Exodus, you will see types of our salvation in Christ and of our life in Christ, right? A type is a foreshadowing, kind of like telling you what's going to happen. Not perfectly, but giving you a good idea. So let's look at the types of our salvation in the book of Exodus. Israel was slaves in bondage, no way to escape. We, before we were saved, were slaves to sin, under the bondage of sin. One day, God visited the Israelites. One day, as we were going about our own business, God visited us. And God told the Israelites, have a Passover lamb. Slaughter that lamb, take the blood, and paint it on your door frame. And when an angel of destruction comes by to destroy the Egyptians, when this angel sees the blood on the door frame, he will pass over that house. That's why it's called a Passover. For us, we trusted Christ, the Lamb of God, whose blood was shed to wash away our sins. When we stand before God, we will not be judged because our sins have been settled in Christ. So that's a Passover. Now, interestingly, the Passover happened on the 14th day of the first month of the Jewish calendar. So they ate their meal on that day. 1,500 years later, on the same day, Christ was crucified. At 3 p.m., Christ said, "It is finished." Sins settled. At about 3 p.m., 1,500 years before Christ said, "It is finished," the Israelites were eating the Passover meal at about 3 p.m., ready to leave Israel. Wow. 3 days after they ate the Passover lamb, they escaped from Egypt. 3 days after Christ died for our sins, he rose from the dead, so that we too can rise from the dead. Then the Israelites, after they escaped from Egypt, went through the Red Sea. That's a picture of baptism. After we are saved and know we are truly saved, we go through baptism. Then they journeyed and they arrived at Mount Sinai 50 days after the Passover meal that they ate. 50 days after Christ died was Pentecost. In Sinai, 50 days after they ate the Passover meal, God gave them the law, the commandments. For us, at Pentecost, God gave the church the Holy Spirit so that we have the ability and strength to fulfill the law that was given at Sinai. Wow. Then the Israelites, after Sinai, were told, now journey to the promised land. It's very near, 14, 15 days journey. But they were, instead of entering the promised land, which is really not heaven. We always think the promised land is heaven. No. The promised land is the place of rest for Israel. The place of rest from all their struggles, and a place where they would have conquest over the enemies in the land. For us, after we have trusted Christ and have the Holy Spirit in our heart, we also will try to enter the place of rest, where we have peace in our heart and where we can conquer our sins that grip us. But of all the Israelites, 2 to 3 million, only 2 entered the place of rest. The rest never entered. It's a type of us Christians. Many Christians, born again, have never had that victorious Christian life, that peace in the heart, that peace from having overcome our struggles with all the sins that grip us, all the worldliness that tempt us. Very few ever find that rest. So I hope you see the types in this journey of the Israelites and in our journey as Christians. Now, the tabernacle is another type. Let me just say very simply, God told the Israelites, build a tabernacle because I want to dwell in the midst of you. See, in the Garden of Eden, God walked in the garden. Now God tells him, no, I want to stay there. Now this is a type of Holy Spirit of God living in our hearts, right? We are the temple of God. Look at the architecture of the tabernacle. One door, one way only. There's only one way to reach God. As you enter that little door in the tabernacle, the first thing you see is the brazen altar. An altar where sacrificial animals are sacrificed. So, all right, first thing you want to do, you want to approach God, you need to trust in your substitute sacrifice, Christ, who died for us. Then the next piece of furniture the priest would see is a big basin of water called a laver. And the priest had to wash his hands there before he could enter closer to the presence of God. What does that speak of? We need to be justified through our sacrifice, Christ, and then we need to be sanctified in our life as we put away sins from our life. And then we can draw closer to the presence of God. So I hope you see the types. Very simple. Exodus is very much the story of our Christian life. Let's now look at why Israel stayed so long in Egypt and what they learned about God in the Exodus journey. They were supposed to stay in Egypt for 7 years, the time of the famine. And then, why stay on? But they stayed on for over 400 years. Now, humanly speaking, they stayed on because they were given prime land in Goshen. They were VIP guests at that time. They were family of the prime minister of Egypt, Joseph. Egypt, because of the massive Nile River, is a very fertile land. Goshen is right at the delta, very fertile. And so life was easy. They had all their physical needs met. Even when the dynasty changed, a new king came and did not favor them, forgot this new dynasty, didn't even know about Joseph. Yet they stayed on in spite of the persecution. Now today Jews are very much the same. They're all kinds of countries. They've settled into businesses that give them a comfortable lifestyle. And though they may be persecuted, and still they stay on. Very few have returned to Israel. So, humanly speaking, that was possibly the reason why they just stayed on. You see, the Promised Land had a little river called Jordan, which often dried up in the dry season. So there were famines when there was a dry season. But Egypt, the Nile, just keeps flowing and flowing. Now, but there are actually divine reasons why they stayed on so long. Number one, God had told Abraham that one day you will inherit the promised land. Now, Abraham is a little group. At this time, when they went to Egypt, there were just 70 of them. How could 70 people occupy the promised land, which was full of built-up cities, beautiful farms? It was filled with very high civilization at that time. 10 nations in the promised land at that time. So how could this handful of people occupy this land? So God told Abraham, you will stay 400 years. And so they grew and multiplied. Of course, the question is, how did 70 become 2 to 3 million? Now, 400 over years, in those days, people reproduced very young. They didn't wait till very late to get married. When they reached puberty, they got married. So let's say they got married 15, 16 at that age. 450 years gives you about 30 generations. 30 generations, you average had about 4 or 5 kids each, you will hit your 2 and 3 million if you do your math. All right? So numbers grew during this period of time, plenty of food in Egypt to sustain them. But there was another reason why they had to wait 400 years before they could occupy the promised land. God had told Abraham that you will only own the promised land after the wickedness of the Amorites or the Canaanites were full. What does that mean? The people in Canaan had a very wicked culture. There were 2 things that stood out. One was immorality. Their whole religion was based on sex, the fertility religion. They worship God by having sex with temple prostitutes, both male and female. Wow, I mean, for us it's like, are you serious? No, that's serious, all right? So sexually transmitted diseases are very, very common. It's found in archaeological findings of bodies. Secondly, they worship their gods, their demon gods, so to speak, by offering human sacrifice, often their own children. Now, this wicked culture couldn't go on forever. And as it got worse and worse, it hit, so to speak, God's limit. And God said, in 400 years, their wickedness will be full, so horrendous that they have to be cleaned out from this earth. That's why we don't have a lot of sex religions today. We don't have a lot of religions that offer their babies to be burned, thankfully. So God removed this awful cancer in human society. So it's not ethnic cleansing, right? It was just morally immoral and wicked. So God said, you have to wait 400 years. Their wickedness will reach a point, I have to do something. So that was why they waited 400 years. Now, in the Exodus journey, what did the Israelites learn about God? Up to that point, when Exodus began, people had what they call their gods, national gods. The Moabites had their god, the Amalekites had their god, the Philistines had their god. Everybody had their own god. That's basically evil spirits. All right? Evil spirits are not omnipresent. They cannot be in the whole world at one time. They can be at a certain place. All right? So every nation had their own gods, demon gods or evil spirit gods, right? So Israel learned first that their God was more powerful than all the gods of Egypt. Wow, the god of the river, the god of the sun, the Egyptian god of the land, their God was more powerful. That's the first thing they learned. Secondly, they learned that their God was actually the only God. The rest were not gods, right? So that was another truth. Their God was the God of the universe. Whoa, that's a new theology of that time because everybody had national gods, right? Then they learned another truth during this journey, that this God of the universe had elected them, this little nation, to be a nation of priests, to bless, eventually, hopefully, the world. Wow, I hope you see the types, like we are priests of God to reach the world. Then they also realized that this God wanted to dwell with men. As he did in the Garden of Eden to walk, now he would want to have his presence with them. Restore his presence with them, a type of Christ living in us now. Okay, so the Jew began to learn these things, these important things about their God. Let's now see what we can learn from the life of Moses. He seems to be so well trained as a leader. God put him through 40 years in the best secular education possible at that time. After that, he got a little arrogant. He wanted to deliver his people, his birth people, the Israelites, with his strength. And he failed. And so he had to flee away. And then God allowed him, this super talented, educated, trained person, trained in the palace of the richest king at that time in the world. God allowed him to spend 40 years in the wilderness, taking care of sheep. Now these 40 years did help to balance his training. Very good, very smart, probably very arrogant. Now God humbled him. God taught him how to take care of sheep because he would take care of 2 to 3 billion sheep for 40 years. God taught him how to live in the wilderness because he would then not only have to live there but teach 2 to 3 billion people how to live and how to travel through this wilderness. So he had 40 years education in one field, secular, and never looked down on the value of secular training. Daniel, for example, was trained in the Babylonian court, another mighty kingdom. Paul was trained on the best brains, the Gamaliel and the Jewish doctors of the law. So don't undervalue. I think sometimes we get so spiritual, we try to throw away our secular training. So God had given him this 280 years of training. And then we see also another part of his life. In spite of we looking to Moses as a superman, we see when God called him at the burning bush, God said, I want you to go and serve me and deliver my people. And then we see Moses gives 5 excuses. And I want to see you to see yourself in Moses as you give these 5 excuses. I hear this all the time. All right? When you approach somebody to serve God, in this case, God approached Moses, the first thing he says, Pastor, who am I? You know, that's the first thing they will say. I'm nobody. And then the next thing they will say is, I don't know what to say. I think God can use you to reach his people. I don't know what to say. That's exactly what Moses said. What do I say? And then after that, you say, yeah, but I don't think they will listen to me. Doesn't sound, Moses said exactly that. They won't listen to me. And then Moses said, but I'm not a good talker. I have a speech problem. A lot of people tell me that. Pastor, I'm not a natural talker. And lastly, they will say, like Moses, why don't you send someone else? See, I hope when you are approached to serve God, not by some, frivolous, but seriously, your pastor, people have prayed over you, ask you to serve. Remember, when you give these 5 excuses, remember Moses. It's so natural to give. How did God help Moses overcome this, I call it, natural tendency to fear? God revealed his name to Moses. God said to him, Moses said, what's your name? And God said, I am that I am. What does that mean? I am means I am the eternal, unchanging God. I never change. No human can say that. Humans say, I was, I am, I will be. It's changing all the time, either growing better or growing worse. But God says, I am. I'm the unchanging, eternal God. Then God gave his personal name. Up to this point, the Israelites knew God as God. That's it. In the Hebrew language, God was El. Elohim, God Almighty. That's all they knew. God Almighty, the God up there. God said, no, my name shall now be Yahweh. That's my personal name. And in Hebrew, that means always. Now, the unchanging eternal God always doesn't forsake you, always will be with you. Whenever you are afraid to serve God, remember, always will always be with you. Whatever you need to do, he will be with you. His grace will see you through. So I hope that whenever you approach and ask to serve God, remember, you can do it. Always, the great I am will help you. Jesus said, I am 7 times. I am, I am, I am. I am the good shepherd, and so on. Jesus lives in us through the Holy Spirit. Let's now see how God dealt with Pharaoh. And in this process, we will learn more about the character of God. Now, many people have this idea, especially after reading Romans chapter 9, that God hath mercy on whom he hath mercy, and whom he hardens, and Pharaoh was in this passage of scripture. It would appear that God just arbitrarily just picks somebody and hardens his heart. Now, when we look at how God dealt with Pharaoh, we must understand that first, Pharaoh chose to have a hardened heart. The way he dealt with the Egyptian slaves, for years before God dealt with him, he was hardened. He was sending their babies, male babies, to be killed. He was treating them very, very roughly. And even when God used Moses to put judgment on Pharaoh, we will notice that Pharaoh first hardened his heart. And then the Bible keeps saying, and he hardened his heart. In fact, something like 7 times, it's Pharaoh first that hardens his heart. And then we see God responding, in a sense that you want to harden your heart, that's the way you want to go, well, that's the way you will go. I'll help you to go in that direction. So while there are many people who like to emphasize the sovereignty of God in the election, he can choose who he wants, he can harden who he wants, it almost appears that that's the only character of God, is sovereignty. That's not true. God's also merciful, God's also just. And so when we see the judgment on Pharaoh, we see the full character of God. He had waited a long time before he sent Moses to Pharaoh. And then even when he sent Moses to deal with Pharaoh, he allowed Pharaoh to respond first. And finally it reaches a certain point when God in his wisdom, in his mercy, and his sovereignty, realizes that this man is determined to continue this way, then I will help him in his direction. So we see that God is sovereign, but he is fair. So what we see here is how God dealt with Pharaoh. Now, how did God send the plagues? How did God deal with the Egyptians? Again, when God sent the plagues, he did not just come full blast. He sent them step by step. He started first with plagues that caused disturbances. The water turned to blood. Then frogs came into their house. Then the land, the dust of the land became lice. So that's very disturbing, but that's not really dangerous. But as they continued, Pharaoh continued to harden his heart, then God stepped up the plagues. He sent disease on the animals, plague on the animals. And then when they continue in hardness, then he sends danger to their life. He sends hailstones that could kill them, but didn't, as long as they took shelter. And finally, after having stepped up slowly from disturbance to disease to life-threatening danger, finally he brings death to the firstborn of Egypt. So you see how God, in his mercy, in his patience, stepped up the judgments, giving them time, giving Pharaoh and his leaders time to respond. Similarly, we see the plagues did not hit the humans straight away. It hit nature first. Frogs died a lot. Lice came up and lice died. Right? And then he hit the animals. And then finally, he hits people. So I hope you see here, while some people like to see one character of God. Oh, God chooses whom he will. God hardens whom he will. It's like, God just closes his eye, point at somebody, I'll harden that guy. God doesn't work that way, right? When we understand the whole Bible, we see a story like this, we begin to understand, not just read Romans chapter 9 and say, election, there's a new doctrine I learned today. Are you elected or not elected? Let's just look at the whole Bible, the context of the Bible. How did God elect to judge the nation of Egypt or Pharaoh? So when we see this, we begin to have a better understanding of our God, the character, the wonderful character of our God. Let's now take a closer look at the Passover. God instructed them to every household to find a lamb of 1 year, male, take it into the house on the 10th day of the first month. For 4 days, they were to be with this lamb to check it out that it was unblemished. The 14th day of the month, they were to kill that lamb, take the blood of the lamb, and paint the frame of their door. The rest of the animal was then to be roasted, not boiled, not left prepared in any other way except to be burned and then eaten by the family. The family was to eat this Passover meal fully dressed, shoes, clothes all ready, packed to go. And on that night, God said, a destroying angel would come and destroy everyone, firstborn, in every house that did not have the blood on the doorpost. When the angel saw the blood on the doorpost, he would pass over that house so nobody would be hurt. And then immediately on that night after the meal, they left Egypt to make their journey out of Egypt. Let's look at the parallel. What happened 1,500 years after this first Passover meal? Jesus was brought into Jerusalem, came into Jerusalem, 10th day of the first month on the Jewish calendar, examined by authorities, and they say, we find no fault in him. Yet, on the 14th day, in the evening, about 3 p.m., as the sun was about to start setting, he was crucified. Suffered unimaginable sufferings in the eyes of man, and of course, more than that, he suffered and died for our sins, not just at the hands of the Romans, but he paid the penalty for our sins. As God judged him for our sins, as he bore our sins. Right? So I hope you can see the parallel here between the Passover lamb 1,500 years ago and our Passover lamb. The blood protected this house. The blood of Jesus Christ cleanses me from all sin. One day I can stand before my God, the judge of my life, and say, I'm a sinner, I deserve to die, but Christ's blood, Christ's death, Christ's blood has paid for my sins, right? So this is, I hope you see the parallel between the two. Another order they were given was that when they had this Passover meal, they were to be followed immediately by the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In other words, for the next 7 days, there should be no leaven found among them. Leaven in the Bible, or yeast, speaks of sin, because yeast has a way of, you put a little bit into a lump of dough, is a way of spreading, right? A little bit of sin in us tends to spread, right? So they were to be sure that they got rid of leaven from their surroundings. Similarly, after we become believers, we have to search our lives and start putting away sins from our life. So I hope you see the very nice parallel. Now the Passover meal is still celebrated 3,500 years after the first one. Jewish families still have the Passover meal. And traditionally, in the Passover meal, the youngest in the meal table would ask, what does all this mean? And the oldest member of the family will then say, we take this Passover in remembrance of the fact that the firstborn of Egypt were killed on that night, but we were spared because of the blood of the Lamb. So up to today, the gospel message is still heard in Jewish families, except they have not realized, rather they will not believe that their Messiah has already come 2,000 years ago and died and shed his blood for them. They cannot accept that their Messiah died such a terrible death. A carpenter's son dying on a cross doesn't fit their mind of a Messiah, a conquering king. They want to see a king conquer physically rather than Jesus who conquered for us. over all our sins. He paid the penalty. So that's the meaning of the Passover. Let's now look at some events that took place after the Passover meal. The Israelites were all packed and ready to go, and then God led them all. How do you lead 2 to 3 million people with a megaphone? No. God led them by a pillar of fire, which became a pillar of cloud during the day. So it was this pillar that led them for the next 40 years. It led these huge mass of people following this pillar of fire to get out of Egypt. What is this pillar supposed to be a type of? God leads us. God doesn't just save us from bondage, save us from hell. God saves us from to something. In other words, we're not just saved from suffering, we're saved to Christ's likeness. So they are now being led out by this pillar. Amazing. Everybody could see, 3 million people could see this massive tower of fire. Then they came to the Red Sea. And a lot of people like to make fun of this story. How do you part a Red Sea? The Bible says a wind came and then the sea parted as if it were like 2 walls, and they went across on dry land. Imagine 2 walls of water held up by an invisible hand, and you see the fish and you see all the huge sea creatures, and yet you just walk across as if you're like going through one of these amazing aquariums nowadays where you can actually watch the fish because a glass panel holds the water. So as they cross it, people say, how can it be? Maybe it was not really a sea, but it was like marshland. And it's true. Between Egypt, on the way to the Promised Land, there are some areas that are kind of marshy. And they say, oh, it's not the Red Sea, it's the Reed Sea, reeds, like marsh. Now, of course, if that was their explanation of this miracle, the Israelites can cross, how do they explain the next part? The Egyptian army came charging after them in their chariots, mighty army, and the whole army was drowned. How do you drown people in reeds, in the marsh? All right, will the Egyptian army be drowned in a marsh? So trying to explain away one miracle, they have now to say God did another miracle. He drowned the Egyptian army with weeds and marsh and grass, right? So that's the crossing of the Red Sea. Now, shortly after they crossed, they faced a problem. No water. And so they found a place where there was water, and they drank the water, and it was bitter. It's like undrinkable water. And so they called that place Mara. Mara means bitter. But they were told to make this water drinkable, nice, they needed to cut a tree and throw it into this water. What is that a type of? Again, we're seeing types throughout Exodus. Christ hung on a tree. The New Testament says that, on a trunk. This trunk was thrown in, and the water now became pleasant. I guess it is a type of when Christ comes into our struggles and our problems, even the bitterness, even the problems of life are sweet, are nice. All right? We can actually have, in the midst of crisis, have great joy and peace in our heart. So after that, they had faced another problem. Food. How do you feed 2 to 3 million people? And God airdropped manna for them. What is the meaning of the word manna? Manna simply means, what is it? All right? When this stuff dropped from heaven and it landed on the ground, it became like little wafers, tiny wafers, small wafers, tasting sweet like honey. Okay? So basically they had what we would call complete food in that wafer because it sustained them for 40 years. 40 is always the number of testing. This food had been tested for 40 years and it sustained them throughout their journey. A complete food. We wish we could get this kind of food in a crisis like we are going through now. You know, how wonderful if the government just gives us stacks of complete food, everything. You don't have to worry about buying vegetables to get your vitamins C, and then to buy your vitamin pills, and to get all just in one little packet. Now, this manna is literally bread dropped from heaven. And Jesus later in John chapter 6 says, I am the bread of life. I am the bread from heaven. Okay, so we see while they were sustained by this manna, Jesus says, you, through your Christian life, will be sustained by me. If you have Christ in your heart and you live a life dependent on Christ, you will go through victoriously. Then again, they face another problem. Again, no water. And then Moses struck the rock and water gushed out from the rock. And from thenceforth, they always had water coming out from rock, right? Now again, Christ in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 is likened to that rock in the wilderness. So again, that refreshment of water in our life, a lot of struggles, a lot of problems. We feel so down, we feel so discouraged, so dry. And then we look up to God, we look up to Christ. Christ lives in us, that spring of water, springing up to life eternal. So I hope you see these little events are all types of our spiritual journey. Let's now see what happened when they arrived at Mount Sinai. It was like a 3-month journey, right down in the wilderness, this mountain. When they arrived there, God told Moses to tell the people to prepare to meet God. So they were to prepare themselves, and then God would speak to them from Mount Sinai. So only Moses was allowed to go up. The rest were at the base of the mountain, not to touch it. And then thunder, lightning, a loud trumpet, and God descended in fire. And it looked like Mount Sinai was on fire. It's like a furnace. And Moses walked up into this awesome presence of God. And he spent 40 days there with God. What did God do during these 40 days? God communicated his instructions to Moses. And we only know, we say, oh, Moses brought down the 10 commandments, as if God took 40 days to tell him those 10 commandments, which you can memorize in 10 minutes. No. 40 days, God taught Moses so that he could teach the people not only the 10 commandments, which is what they call the book, the Jews call this the book of the covenant. This is the laws, the principles for our moral behavior. These principles are everlasting. You don't lie, you don't commit adultery. It's not for Jews, or it's not just for Israel, it's for all men. This is God's principles for life. So those are the 10 commandments. But God also communicated to Moses many other laws about how to live in their society, how to treat your wife, how to treat your kids, how to treat your slaves, how to treat your neighbors, how to deal with a thief, and so on, how to deal with your land. So those are like community laws. And then God also gave them laws on how to worship Him. Largely, they were very specific details of how to build the tabernacle and how the priests would be dressed and behave and what they were supposed to do in the tabernacle. So for 40 days, Moses, of course, had to remember all these things, probably ask 1,000 questions to get it right because he had to teach the people, right? Now, when you read all this from Exodus 20, all these laws, the 10 Commandments, you want to take it very seriously. It's for us. Then the laws about community life. It's almost like, do you remember all the laws of Singapore about littering, about public nuisance, about divorce laws? I think lawyers know all those things. For us, we just want to know that there are those laws. We don't need to know the details of them. Furthermore, about the tabernacle, how it was to be embroidered and how many cubits. Do you really need to know all those things? Frankly, no. They were meant for Israelite society and for Israelite worship. They're useful to know. I'm sure there are a lot of beautiful things in those details that are types for us to learn. We can learn about God through those things, but we don't need to study them as if we are Israelites. Oh, what do I do when, my neighbor steals my cattle, So what I'm trying to say here is a lot of Christians read this and say, oh my goodness, so many details, so boring, I get stuck in this. Don't get stuck. Just listen. It's good to know when I hear lawyers telling us about their divorce laws and their laws about this. I'm just interested. I don't like, excuse me, what do you say? Take notes. There's no need, all right? So please remember to read the Bible, or sometimes just listen to the Bible, because if you read everything the same way, you will take years to finish the Bible and you will get lost in the woods. That's why most Christians are lost in the woods. They don't know when to take it as if it's directly to me. 10 Commandments directly. I better memorize that. Do I memorize how to deal with cattle that are stolen? All right? By an Israelite neighbor? I don't need to memorize that. I don't even need to read it in detail. I just need to hear it. So I hope you understand that there's so many laws, and some people get stuck in the history of Israel, or the king, and you can't even remember their names. Okay. For the Israelites, it's very important. That's their history. You learn your history. But we can learn things from their history. So I hope that when you come to chapters like chapter 21, 22, and go on to like tens of chapters, just listen to it, get the feel of it. So I hope you see here that God at Sinai was giving Moses rules how to live. They had now seen God's grace. Now they need to respond in gratitude. How do you show great gratitude to the one who's good to you, to your parents, for example? By obeying them, by obeying their rules. So God was giving them now their responsibility to obey God. Let's now see what happened after Moses went up to the mountain, got all those regulations from God. The people were restless. 40 days, where is this Moses? And so they told Aaron, make us gods. And so Aaron said, all right, give me all your golden earrings, all your golden ornaments. And then he melted them and made a molten calf. It's kind of a very common god, is a cow god in many nations. Even to today, the cow looks strong, The cow is fertile. It produces offspring that give milk, and so people often worship the sun, they worship the cow, and so they made this cow god. And God told Moses, go down and deal with them. As Moses went down, he heard singing, and people were having a orgy. They were naked, dancing around, having a wild party. Principle to learn. Usually when a nation has idolatry, there's a lot of immorality. If you know God is up there, the big God looking down on you, he can see everything, you tend to behave yourself more carefully. But if your God is a little God you can put in a corner, his eyes cannot see, then you do a lot of things feeling very free because your God looks so tiny and impotent, and anyway he has eyes that don't see. So you find that idolatry and immorality tend to come together. In countries where there idolatry, sex trade, polygamy, all kinds of concubines, very, very normal. Go to a brothel, anywhere. Idols are everywhere. There are more idols sometimes in a brothel than in a temple, right? So what do we learn? Okay, when you see idolatry, usually it is linked to immorality. So God's so angry with them, and Moses had to go up again for 40 days this time, and second 40 days with God. So let's end the story by learn a few things. We see that finally they built this amazing tabernacle. How did they build this tabernacle? How did slaves have the material to build the tabernacle? Fine linen, all kinds of beautiful jewelry for the priest to wear, a ton of gold for the tabernacle to line the ark with gold. How did they have it? God had provided for them. Before they left Egypt, they were told, go and ask your neighbor for things and you will find favor. And the Egyptians gave them their things before they left, so they had all the material. How did they have the workmen to do this tabernacle? The first time we see God gives the spirit of wisdom to some workers. Now we always think the spirit of wisdom from God is to study, be a scholar and learn amazing things. You know, we say that man has a spirit of wisdom, he can preach like an angel. The first time God gave the spirit of wisdom, it was for workmen to do embroidery and metalwork, to do the things for the temple. So what do we learn from this? We learn that oftentimes we have made our faith a very scholarly, a very brainy thing, when actually we can serve God with all the different talents that He has given us. Sometimes our talent is just befriending somebody, right? God gives us a spirit of befriending, spirit of encouragement, right? So very so-called non-brilliant, non-academic, non-scholastic things are also can be used to serve God. So finally the temple is built, and you think, wow, the temple is built and Moses can't even enter the temple. The cloud comes down in glory and Moses cannot enter the temple. So we continue the story in the next book of Leviticus. So please just listen through Exodus. It's 40 chapters. You can just listen through it. You don't need to read it if you're not a reader. You could go through this book very quickly. Less than an hour. You probably have an audio Bible, and 2 hours, so you could finish this. So may I recommend this? First half is stories for listening. Second half is laws, not for you, for the Israelites. So some parts of it, you might focus a little bit, like the 10 Commandments, and the rest, you could listen to it and get all the lessons that can bless you. Of course, if you're a scholar and you've read through the Bible many times, go ahead, read it and go dive deep into it. But you've never been through the entire Bible, can I suggest just listen to the stories and then listen to the rules and get a better overview of the beauty of this Bible. God bless you.